Is there something that can be done to change it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's sort of the big exciting message of my life is you're not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better, and I can prove it. I did the big NFL study when the NFL was lying that it had a problem about traumatic brain injury in football. I scanned 350 NFL players and high levels of damage. Stop lying about it. But 80% of my players get better when we put them on a rehabilitation program. And there's a story in the book about a mixed martial artist who I was giving a lecture at the clinic, and he raised his hand and he said, "I just really love your work, but you're not going to like what I do." I'm like, "What's that?" He said, "I'm a mixed martial artist." And I'm like, "Well, I can like you, but yeah, you're right. I'm not a fan of people bashing your head in." And I said, "Let's look at your scan." And it was troubled. I said, I know these supplements work because they were my NFL formula, but I don't know how fast they work. Will you come tomorrow at 8 o'clock? I'm going to give you the supplements I give my NFL players, and then I'm going to scan you 2.5 hours later. His brain was remarkably better 2.5 hours later. Now, it didn't mean it would stay that way, right? He had to stay on the program and stop doing the things that hurt his brain. But how exciting is that to know even a couple of hours from now, if I do the right things, my brain can be better. And going back to my dad, what we found is low levels of serotonin go with high activity in the anterior cingulate. So if he would have chosen, I could have calmed it down and helped him be more flexible. Now, he chose not to do that. But I just remember my grandmother, my mom's mom, when she was 92, she went in the hospital, diverticulitis. And my mom's mom had always been mean. She's not kind. When she met my wife for the first time, she goes, "Oh, you're Danny's next victim." I'm like, "Grandma," I said, "I'm going to talk bad about you after you're dead." She had that same brain. And when I put her on medicine to increase serotonin, she became sweet, which just goes to makes you wonder how many people end up divorced because of a brain dysfunction that could be fixed. It's just given me great empathy. It's easy to call someone bad. It's harder to ask why.
In the case of your father or your grandmother, is their brain and the mood kind of disorder that you've observed in it, is that a consequence of chronic bad habits in terms of brain health, in your view?
It's always both. That whenever you give in to saying no, you make saying no more likely.
Right.
You develop these ruts in your brain, which is why behavior change is hard, because you have these ruts in your brain where it's after dinner I smoke, or it's after dinner I have ice cream, or it's first thing in the morning I have sugar cereal.
And those become like pathways.
They become ruts, like deep pathways in the brain. And I've had them for years. I mean, for a long time before I got healthy. I'd go buy Jack in the Box and get a Diet Coke and get a chicken fajita pita, and it was habit. And so sometimes I'll see a Jack in the Box, like, oh. And then, of course, my supervisor comes in and like, really? And I think of it
your
like,
supervisor is in your your better sense.
Well, I think of it like children. That too many people are run by the 4-year-olds in their head. Like, I have 5 grandchildren, and Haven is 4. And Haven is funny and smart and sweet, but if she doesn't get her way, she totally can have a fit. And the rule in my house is if you have a tantrum to get your way, the answer is no. It's always going to be no. Go for it. And so I didn't have tantrums with the kids growing up. But too many people, the 4-year-old in their head is running the show. It's like, no, I go buy Jack in the Box. I get curly fries and a Coke. I want it, I want it, I want it, I want it. And their parent self doesn't fit your goals. You don't want it, right? You crave it. And there's a difference between craving and wanting. And it's like inhibit behavior. And that's where we haven't talked about this yet. And I knew we would on this podcast, the CEO in the brain, right? So the front third of your brain is called the prefrontal cortex. It's called the executive part of the brain. And so you talked about some of your friends who don't make good decisions, who don't wait or delay their impulses. Their frontal lobes are probably sleepy or smaller. And that'll give them huge problems in their lives. And my work, I've seen tens of thousands of people have ADD of one form or another, and it often goes with decreased activity in their frontal lobes.
Is that nature or nurture?
Nature with input from nurture. Because they did this great study in Holland where they took 300 ADD kids, put them on an elimination diet. So they basically eliminated all the crap in their diet. And 3 months later, 72% of the children did not have ADD anymore. So, but when I diagnose someone with ADD, I generally see it, coming down their mom's side or their dad's side. It generally doesn't occur in isolation. It is that strongly heritable. In fact, if I have a kid who's really ADD and I can't find it in mom or dad, I look at the kid to see if he looks like mom or dad, wondering if they got switched at birth. Just my experience.
Really?
And really, no, not kidding. And
So say that again. So if the child's brain doesn't resemble the mother or the father, you suspect that.
So I wonder
if the child's not
the
related.
child had been switched.
Because you're that confident.
Because I'm that confident about the heritability of this. Now, there are other causes of ADD-like behavior, like traumatic brain injury. If the child fell down a flight of stairs and was unconscious, even for just like 15 minutes, that can damage their frontal lobes. If the child was a headbanger, that can damage their frontal lobes. And so...
Psychological trauma? I sat here with Gabor Mate.
Interesting. We're just doing a study on ACE scores. Do you know about the ACE quiz? It stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it was first done in combination with the CDC and Kaiser. They looked at 17,000 people. And they just gave people this simple questionnaire. And it's 10 of the most common childhood traumas. So physical, emotional, sexual abuse, having a parent with mental illness, with an addiction, incarceration, and you get scored 0 to 10. So I have a 1. My dad could really be nasty to me. So there's some of that sort of psychological abuse. But I didn't get beaten. No one sexually molested me, and so on. My wife, and she wrote a book about this called The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child, has 8 out of 10. My 2 nieces, who Tana and I adopted, are both 9s. And they found if you have 4 or more, you have an increased risk of 7 of the top 10 leading causes of death. If you have 6 or more, you die 20 years earlier. Now, it's not a death sentence if you know it and you work on it, like Tana has. You have normal lifespan. But how wild is that? And so when I learned about it, I started giving it to all of our patients. And I now have 10,000 ACE scores on my patients. And we looked at their brains. And what we found is it tends to activate the medial frontal lobe, and they become hyper alert. They begin to watch what bad thing is going to happen. And I love a therapy. Have you ever heard of EMDR?
Yes, I've heard of it.
It's a psychological treatment for trauma. Stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's my favorite psychotherapy. I love doing it with patients. And when I met my wife, she's beautiful, she's smart. I mean, I fell for her. And then I'm learning about this. So one of my first gifts to her was 10 sessions of EMDR, which I know is pretty weird. But she went for 2 years. And I think it changed the trajectory of her life because she doesn't live with the past still present.
How did it help her? And what exactly does the therapy involve?
So trust, a good history. And then, so for example, if you came to see me, I would have you write down, we do a timeline of your life. I just want to know for each 5-year period, what were the great things that happened to you and what were the horrible things that happened to you. And I do that purposefully so you'll have a balanced view. If you just talk about the crap in your life, you feel like crap. And then I'd have you write down the top 10 traumas. And then it's a structured process, but I'd have you bring up the worst one. We always go for the worst first. And while you bring it up, I'll get your eyes to go back and forth, and we'll let your brain direct where you need to go. And so initially you could feel relive the trauma, but then it tends to dissipate. As opposed to just talking about the trauma, generally you relive it and feel like crap. The bilateral hemisphere stimulation helps it sort of just sucks the life out of it. You still remember it, but it's not haunting you anymore. You can go, yeah, that happened, but you're not sweating or you're not having nightmares. And it just takes therapy to a whole different level. It's sort of like doing mushrooms without side effects.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.